My stepmother called a family meeting at my childhood home to announce she was putting my grandfather's property in her name and that I needed to sign the transfer papers that night. She smiled like she was doing me a favor. I glanced at the man sitting in the corner of the room, my grandfather's attorney of 30 years, and gave him the smallest nod. He opened his briefcase, and the smile on her face turned to something I hadn't seen before. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The house smelled different when I pulled into the driveway. It always did when she'd been cleaning, that artificial lavender, the kind that comes in a spray can, that my grandfather used to wave away with his hand and say, "Smells like a funeral parlor, Stella." His name for me was Stella, not my actual name. Just something he started calling me when I was 4 because I had pointed at a star and refused to call it anything else for 3 weeks. He was the only person who ever made me feel like a cork could be a gift. He passed 9 weeks ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. I had moved back into his house in Clarksville, Tennessee, the day after I got the call. I put my lease on hold, told my supervisor I needed family leave, and drove 6 hours with 2 bags and a box of his favorite chamomile tea that I'd bought on impulse at a gas station because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. My stepmother, my father's second wife, a woman I'd known since I was 12, had visited 3 times during those 6 months. I counted. Once in October when the prognosis first came in, once in December when my father guilted her into flying down for Christmas, and once 2 weeks before the end, when it became clear the timeline was real and not just a worst-case estimate. She brought a poinsettia in December. She left it on the porch. I don't think she ever brought it inside. My father was better about it, I'll give him that. He came when he could, which was roughly every other weekend. He lives in Phoenix now with my stepmother, which is 9 hours by car and a culture shock from the Tennessee Valley town where he grew up and where my grandfather had lived in the same house on Sycamore Road for 41 years. My father cried the night Grandpa passed. I held his hand in the hospital hallway, and then 3 days later, my stepmother arrived with a rolling suitcase and a color-coded folder, and something shifted in the air between us. I work in title insurance. I know what probate looks like. I know what transfer documents look like. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to move faster than the law requires. The family meeting was called for a Thursday evening, 7 o'clock. My stepmother sent the text, not my father, her, saying we needed to discuss next steps for the estate. I didn't say anything when I read it. I just sat with it for a minute, staring at the words next steps, like they were a puzzle I'd already solved. Then I called Mr. Harlan. Mr. Harlan is 81 years old, semi-retired, and has known my grandfather since they coached Little League together in 1987. He is also a property and estate attorney, licensed in Tennessee, and the man my grandfather trusted more than anyone outside of family, and honestly more than most people inside it. He drafted my grandfather's will. He'd also drafted the secondary document my grandfather had asked for 18 months ago, on a day when his mind was still sharp and his hands still steady, when he looked at me across his kitchen table and said, "I need you to know something before this gets bad. I need you to know what I've already done." I told Mr. Harlan about the meeting. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What time?" 7. "I'll be there at 6:45. I want to be fair. My stepmother is not a monster. She's a woman who grew up with very little, married my father late in life, and has spent the last decade in a house that's nicer than anything she expected. She is also a woman who calculates, not cruelly necessarily, but constantly. She looks at a room and sees what things cost. She looks at a situation and sees what she might gain. My grandfather saw it from the beginning. He was polite to her, always. But once, during one of those late, lucid afternoons when he'd get philosophical, he said to me, "Your stepmother reminds me of a bird that watches the feeder but never comes to the yard. She's waiting for the people to go inside." I didn't fully understand that until the night of the meeting. My father was already seated when I arrived. He was at the dining room table that had been my grandmother's, the one with the scratched leaf that we'd never fixed because Grandpa said the scratch had a story. My stepmother was in the kitchen, making coffee no one had asked for, moving with that particular energy of a person who's rehearsed what they're about to say. My uncle, my grandfather's younger brother, the one who lives 40 minutes away in Dixon, was there too, which surprised me. He's a quiet man, the kind who doesn't come to things unless someone asked him to. I caught his eye when I walked in. He looked uncomfortable. Mr. Harlan came in behind me. My stepmother walked out of the kitchen holding 2 mugs and stopped when she saw him. The coffee sloshed. She didn't spill it, but it was close. I didn't know we were having guests, she said. He's family, I said, which was a stretch technically but not emotionally, and I didn't feel like making distinctions. My father looked between us. What's going on? We haven't started yet, I said, pulling out a chair. Let's hear it. My stepmother set down the mugs and sat. She opened her color-coded folder. She had a real estate attorney friend who had apparently drafted some paperwork, a deed transfer, quitclaim format, moving the Sycamore Road property into a joint trust in her and my father's name. She explained it as a practical matter. Estate taxes, she said. Probate delays. She had done research. She knew that Tennessee had a simplified probate process for estates under a certain value, but the house, which had been paid off for years and appreciated significantly in the Clarksville market, pushed the total over that threshold. A trust transfer now, she argued, would simplify things for everyone. You just need to sign here, she said, sliding a page toward me. You're listed as a beneficiary in the will, so your signature releases any claim on the property specifically. Your inheritance is addressed separately. She smiled. It's really just paperwork. I looked at the document. I knew exactly what I was looking at. A quitclaim deed relinquishes your claim to a property regardless of what you think you own. You sign it, the property moves. Whatever the will says becomes secondary to the recorded deed. It's not illegal if everyone signs willingly, but it bypasses the will entirely. My grandfather's will left the house to me. Not to my father, not to my stepmother. To me, his granddaughter, who had slept on a cot in his living room for 6 months, who had learned to crush his medications into applesauce when swallowing became difficult, who had sat beside him on the porch in September while he was still well enough to watch the light change over the ridge and tell me things he'd never told anyone. I'm not signing that, I said. My stepmother's expression didn't change immediately. She had prepared for some resistance. Sweetheart, I know this is emotional, but practically speaking. I know what a quitclaim deed does, I said. I work in title insurance. I've processed hundreds of these. Brief silence. My father shifted in his seat. She's just trying to make things easier, honey. The house would still be in the family. The house is already in the family, I said. Grandpa left it to me. My stepmother closed her folder. The warmth in her voice cooled by about 15 degrees. Your grandfather was in declining health for a long time. He wasn't always thinking clearly about long-term implications. The will was drafted when he was. The will was drafted 14 months ago, Mr. Harlan said from the corner. Everyone looked at him. He hadn't sat down. He was standing near the window with his briefcase in his hand, and he had that quality some old men develop where they don't need to raise their voice to fill a room. I drafted it, he continued. I witnessed it. I had it notarized. At that time, Raymond was of sound mind, fully oriented and specific about his intentions. He also asked me to be present tonight, in the event that this conversation became what it appears to be becoming. My stepmother looked at my father. My father looked at his hands. There is also a secondary document, Mr. Harlan said, opening his briefcase and removing a folder of his own, that Raymond prepared separately, addressing certain financial matters he felt should be on record. What document? My stepmother asked. Her voice had gone flat. To understand what came next, I need to go back a few years. My grandfather was a practical man who had grown up watching people lose things, farms, businesses, marriages, because they didn't write anything down. He had a filing cabinet in his office that he called the evidence drawer. He kept receipts for everything: warranty cards, old insurance policies, letters. He had receipts from grocery stores in 1974 in that drawer. He was not a paranoid man. He was a precise one. When my father's first business failed, a landscaping company he'd started in his 40s, which I barely remembered, my grandfather had helped him out. When my father relocated to Phoenix and needed help with a down payment on a house he couldn't quite afford, my grandfather helped. When there was a rough year about 5 years back, the kind of rough year my father only half mentioned to me over the phone, my grandfather helped again. These were not small amounts. These were the kinds of amounts that get written down if you're the kind of man who writes things down. My grandfather was exactly that kind of man. Mr. Harlan laid the secondary document on the table. It was a notarized accounting, every loan, every amount, every date. My father's name was at the top of the first page, the total with the informal interest rate my grandfather had noted. Not punitive, just the rate of a savings account, because he always said he wasn't a bank, just a father, came to just under $140,000. My father's face went the color of old paper. Those were gifts, he said. The same thing people always say. Raymond noted them as loans, Mr. Harlan said. There are signed acknowledgement letters for each one dating back 11 years. Your signature is on every one. My stepmother stood up. She didn't yell. That surprised me. She was very still, actually, which was almost worse. This is a setup, she said quietly. You knew we were coming tonight, and you arranged this to humiliate us. I arranged it, I said, because you texted me with a document you wanted me to sign transferring my grandfather's house out of my name without telling me that's what it was. You don't even live here. What are you going to do with a house in Clarksville? You live in Nashville. You have an apartment. I'll figure that out, I said. It's my house. She turned to my father. I watched her do it, watched her calculate in real time, figure out that he was not going to be useful in this moment, that the folder and the coffee and the prepared speech had not worked, that there was a man with a briefcase and 40 years of documentation standing in the corner of the room. She picked up a purse. This isn't over, she said. I know, I said, but it's over for tonight. She walked out. The front door didn't slam. She was too controlled for that, but it closed with the particular firmness of someone who intends to continue the conversation elsewhere. My father didn't follow her. He sat at the table for a long moment, looking at the accounting document without touching it. My uncle, who had not said a single word the entire time, quietly got up and went to the kitchen. I heard him fill a glass of water. I didn't know she'd done all of this, my father said finally. His voice was low. I know you didn't plan it, I said. And I meant it. My father is not a strategist. He is a man who follows the path of least resistance and calls it keeping the peace. He had probably told himself the transfer was genuinely the practical thing, had probably not thought too hard about the fact that the house was mine in the will, had probably let my stepmother do the research and the drafting and the calling and the scheduling and just showed up to sign his name. The loans are real, Dad, I said. You know that. He nodded, slowly. Grandpa wasn't trying to trap you. He was just writing things down because that's what he did. Mr. Harlan and I haven't decided what to do with it yet, but you need to understand that transferring the house isn't going to fix whatever is actually wrong. He looked at me for the first time that night like I was a person and not an obstacle. Are you keeping the house? Yes, I said. I am. The weeks after the meeting were not quiet. My stepmother did not let it go. She called my father constantly. I know because he told me, in halting pieces. During the calls we started having more regularly, once the ice between us cracked a little. She told him I was being vindictive, that I was using grief as a weapon, that a 29-year-old woman with a good job in Nashville had no real need for a house in Clarksville and was just holding it to hurt the family. She suggested, through my father, that I might be willing to negotiate. sell the house, split the proceeds. I was not willing to negotiate. I had also, in the meantime, called my own attorney, a younger woman in Nashville who specializes in estate disputes and who has the useful quality of being both extremely competent and visibly unbothered by pressure. She reviewed everything Mr. Harlan had prepared, confirmed that the will was airtight and properly filed, and noted that my stepmother's attempt to have me sign a quitclaim deed before the estate was even in probate was, at best, ethically aggressive. At worst, she said, sliding a coffee cup across her desk, it's attempted fraud, depending on how the conversation was framed. I thought about the way my stepmother had said it's really just paperwork. I thought about the fact that she'd prepared the document in advance without telling me what it was. She called it simplifying the estate, I said. My attorney looked at me over her glasses. Did she explain what a quitclaim deed does? No. Then we'll keep that in mind. Nothing was filed. I didn't pursue it. What I wanted was not to punish my stepmother. I'm not built that way, and honestly, a legal fight is exhausting and expensive, and the outcome was already settled in my favor. What I wanted was for the house to be mine, the way my grandfather intended, and for the record to be clear about what had been attempted. The probate process took about 4 months. Tennessee has a relatively straightforward process when the will is clear and uncontested, and once my stepmother understood that contesting it would require proving my grandfather was of unsound mind, which Mr. Harlan and I could counter with documentation, medical records, and his own testimony, she stopped. The house transferred into my name on the Thursday afternoon in March. Mr. Harlan called me when it went through. He said Raymond would be pleased. I had to sit in my car for a few minutes after that. My father and I talked more over those 4 months than we had in years. It was uncomfortable at first. We are not a family that does uncomfortable conversations well, which is probably how things got this bad to begin with. But we talked. He told me about the business, the real version of what had been wrong, not the half mentions I'd gotten over the phone. He told me my stepmother had pushed for the transfer because they'd been using a home equity line on their Phoenix house that was coming due, and she'd been hoping to use the Clarksville property as leverage. He told me he hadn't fully understood what she was asking him to be part of until that night, when Mr. Harlan opened the briefcase. I should have asked more questions, he said, which is the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Yeah, I said, you should have. We're not fixed. I don't want to make it sound like we are. But we're talking, and that's more than we were doing before. I didn't see my stepmother for a long time after that, and when I finally did, at my cousin's graduation party in July, across a backyard full of people, she looked at me the way people look at someone they've decided to be civil to, which is not the same as looking at someone you respect, but is, I've come to understand, sometimes the best you can get from certain people. I moved into the house on Sycamore Road in April. Not full-time, not right away. I kept my Nashville apartment for a few months, drove back and forth on weekends while I figured out logistics. But I wanted to be in it. I wanted to sit in the kitchen in the morning with coffee and hear the particular silence of a house that knows you. I started fixing things slowly. The scratch on the dining room table leaf I left alone. My uncle came over one Sunday and helped me repaint the front porch the way my grandfather had always meant to. We ordered pizza and talked about Grandpa's Little League days, and I learned things about him I'd never known. That he'd been a genuinely terrible pitcher and had only volunteered to coach because no one else would. That he'd once accidentally driven the team van into a ditch on the way to an away game in Bowling Green and sworn the kids to secrecy. I laughed for the first time in a while that afternoon. I also started going through the filing cabinet, the evidence drawer. It was exactly what he'd said it was. Decades of paper, organized in a system that only made sense if you'd been maintaining it since 1971. Receipts, yes, but also letters, cards, a folder labeled in his handwriting, Stella Keep. Inside was every card I'd ever sent him. Birthday cards, a Mother's Day card I'd given him when I was 7 because I didn't fully understand the holiday, a letter I'd written in high school about a history project I'd done on the Cumberland River Valley that he'd apparently saved because he thought I might be a writer someday. I sat on the floor of his office for a long time with that folder. He had also left me something I hadn't expected, a short handwritten note, separate from the will, tucked inside a small envelope with my name on it. Mr. Harlan had given it to me after probate closed. I'd been waiting until I was in the house to open it. It said, "The house is yours because you earned it, not because you were owed it. There's a difference. Your father is a good man who makes bad choices. Love him for the first thing and help him with the second when you can. The garden is going to need work in the spring." I left instructions in the blue notebook in the garage. He had, in fact, left a very detailed blue notebook about the garden. Tomatoes, specifically. He had opinions about tomatoes that turned out to span 14 pages. I planted them in May. They came in better than I expected. My father called in June to ask how the house was. We talked for almost an hour. He asked about the tomatoes. My stepmother didn't come up. At the end of the call, he said, "I'm sorry I wasn't there more. When Dad was sick, I'm sorry I left that to you." I said, "I know." I meant it as forgiveness, or the start of it, and I think he understood that. The loan accounting is still an open matter. Technically, Mr. Harlan holds the documentation, and the estate is technically the creditor. I've told my attorney I'm not interested in pursuing collection. What I want, if anything, is for my father to acknowledge what it was and not call it something else. We're working toward that. Slowly. In the meantime, the house on Sycamore Road is mine. The porch is freshly painted. The evidence drawer is organized. The tomatoes are in. And every morning when I make coffee in my grandfather's kitchen, in the house he kept for 41 years and left to the person he trusted most, I feel something that takes me a minute to name. It's what he always said the money was for, not the house, not the title, not the victory over anyone. Just the simple, solid, unargued fact of being free. I still think about the way my stepmother said it's really just paperwork, the confidence in it, the casual certainty that I would nod, pick up the pen, and sign away something my grandfather had spent 41 years building. Because she had prepared a folder and made coffee and assumed that was enough. What stopped her wasn't luck. It wasn't even Mr. Harlan, though he was essential. What stopped her was a chain of choices made long before that Thursday night. My grandfather writing things down for decades because he believed the truth deserved to be on record, me learning a profession that taught me exactly what a quitclaim deed does, and both of us deciding independently that preparation mattered more than confrontation. That's how it actually works, I think. The moment that looks like victory is almost never where the real work happened. The real work was in the filing cabinet. The real work was in the phone call I made before I ever walked through that door. I used to think being the responsible one was just a role that got assigned to you. The one who shows up, the one who stays, the one who manages the hard things while everyone else finds reasons to be somewhere else. I resented it sometimes, honestly. During the 6 months in my grandfather's house, there were nights when I was exhausted in a way I didn't have words for, and I would think about my stepmother in Phoenix and feel something close to fury. But those months also gave me something I couldn't have gotten any other way. They gave me time. They gave me the late afternoons when my grandfather was lucid and willing to talk, the conversations where he told me about the evidence drawer, about the loans, about what he'd already arranged. He trusted me with those things because I was there. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. Doing right by someone, really showing up for them, not just boasting about it, builds something in you that doesn't go away. It builds the kind of clarity that lets you walk into a room where someone is trying to deceive you and recognize it immediately. It builds the kind of steadiness that lets you say, "I'm not signing that," without your voice breaking. I didn't find that steadiness by accident. I found it because I had spent 6 months doing the hardest, least glamorous work of my life, and it had made me someone I recognized. The intelligence piece mattered too, and I don't mean that in a cold way. I mean that understanding how things actually work, the legal mechanics, the documentation, what words on a page mean versus what someone tells you they mean, is a form of protection that no one can take from you. My grandfather understood this. He was not a formally educated man, but he was meticulous, and he knew that knowledge without a paper trail is just an opinion. He left me a paper trail 40 years in the making. I like to think he would be pleased that I knew what to do with it. And then there's the part that's hardest to talk about, which is just staying in it, not giving up when it got uncomfortable, not backing down when my stepmother said this isn't over, not accepting the version of events where I was the difficult one for refusing to make things easy for people who were trying to take what wasn't theirs. Persistence isn't a dramatic quality. It doesn't look like much from the outside. It mostly looks like showing up again the next day and the day after that. But it's the thing that actually determines outcomes in my experience. The house is mine because I didn't sign a piece of paper on a Thursday night. But more than that, it's mine because from months before that night, I had done the work, asked the questions, made the calls, and refused to be moved by people who were counting on me to be easier than I turned out to be. The tomatoes came in well this year. I think my grandfather would have had notes.